Good afternoon and good morning to everybody joining us. Welcome to the first VirtuaCon Live. Hopefully, if this goes well, the first of a number that we're hoping to run over summer and autumn, whilst all conferences are currently down. Today, we're joined by people from 4 different time zones, in Reza, Moaiandin from SALT, Dan Leibson of Local SEO Guide, Jamie Alberico, Not a Robot, and later on this afternoon we'll be joined by John Mueller of Google, Switzerland. So without further ado, I'm going to hand over to Reza Moaiandin, who's going to be talking about Headless, SPAs, and JavaScript SEO and the implementation. Reza, over to you.
Hello, everyone. I'm just going to share my screen momentarily. Right. Okay. Hi. My name is Reza. I'm an ex-JavaScript software engineer, and I started building SPAs back in 2013 for enterprise firms. I fell into SEO in 2014 and ended up co-founding SALT. Now onto the talk for a bit of history lesson to begin with. So most of us know how websites generally work. Browser sends a request to the server. The server generally compiles pages. It works out the logic, grabs the data, puts all of it together nicely from the database, and then the browser gets back the data and then renders it. It messes about a little bit with the CSS and makes it pretty. There is some JavaScript that goes into it and makes AJAX calls, or nowadays over sockets and everything else, but that's pretty much it. And it's still to this day, with some exceptions, majority of the platforms that you see work like that, and it hasn't changed much in the last 20 years. Now, there are tons of problems with this. Generally, with these kind of websites, you can't scale your development teams much, and full stack developers are across the website. Rendering is quite heavy and dependent on the server, which means for popular websites, it is very costly for the companies to run it. Now, at the same time, almost all the interactions require a fresh set of pages. So every time you click on a link, majority of the times, the page opens up from scratch, everything else gets called in, and then you'll see the website. And then finally, we burn a lot of cash by using resources that we don't need to, because we can have them all running on the user's idle CPU and let the user render it. So that's a few problems that you tend to see with the old systems. Now, there is a better way of doing it, and that's through single page applications. So a single page application is essentially a website or an application that interacts with the browser and dynamically rewrites the current web page. So any changes within the page only requires a small set of data to be sent. The way it works is visually is the browser sends a request to the server. Server sends back the most basic type of data. So you will have a page that's almost empty and contains very basic elements. And then your modern browser handles the rest of it through JavaScript and the communications and through APIs, and the data is pulled back in through the API communications, and it's all rendered up. Majority of the new modern platforms and frameworks such as Gatsby, Netlify, and everything else run through that, and I will come to it shortly. Now, why is this better? Because it lets everybody do what they're very, very good at. Engineers can focus on creating super fast websites and focusing on their platforms. Designers can make design changes to the site without actually modifying any of the core platform code and posts. And then content producers will be able to produce the content and upload the files without having to break the platform, or the design. And these are the three different segments that contribute to each other. So the engineers will work, for example, with the core networking side, such as Netlify. Designers will work with the front-end code, such as React.js and the CSS. And then content producers will work with the headless CMSs. So a headless CMS is essentially a platform on the front end that provides APIs to give the data out. And it doesn't require the rest of the platform to be running. Now, there is more benefits to it than just the developers and the people side. It is really, really fast. So your TTFB generally is extremely quick. And because you're sending very little amount of data, you can load up the instantaneous side of the page, of that small page, very, very quickly. So in the screenshot here, you're seeing a 36 millisecond TTFB on a Netlify network. I've seen this going down to 15 milliseconds. If you were, for example, on Cloudflare, probably you can get that down to about 9 milliseconds. It's also amazingly fast on the UX side. So I've shared the video of a website called the Stoplight, which runs on React.js and Netlify. And if you view it, you can see how quickly the pages change. I'll just repeat that again as well for people who have not seen it. And you can see the interaction is super fast and file load times are really, really quick. Now, there is a problem with most of this. And it's the reaction I tend to get from all the SEOs when I talk about SPAs and React.js websites and anything similar. And it's this. Most SEOs I talk to tend to feel like the website's going to crash and the rankings are going to crash. But I can assure you that JavaScript and SPAs do not crash your rankings. Lack of good architecture and development crashes your ranking. That's not to say that the SEOs don't have anything to worry about. A lot of the developers are also clueless about our needs as SEOs. Now, here's what typically happens. Imagine your SPA platform or your website as an artist trying to draw a beautiful website with the stand as the host and the canvas as the browser. Our SPAs, on SPAs, the artist does not need to redraw the painting. And if you want to make the changes, all you need to do is to make a very small change. So on this, and in this example, you've got the website there. If I want to make one little change, I'll just redraw that side. And then if I want to go to another page, I'll just redraw that part of it. On the initial load, the website does need to load a lot of the SPA code up, but the rest of it is very, very quick. Now, a search engine, on the other hand side, is in a rush and don't want to see all that to happen. All he wants to see is the finished product, well, sort of. So the faster we can do this, the better it is. And for now, it's very, very costly for search engines to go ahead and render the entire page. So this is not the kind of code we want to see on a website. We want to see that being rendered, as we call it. Now, what are the solutions to this? One is for us to create a fully static website. So think about old school HTML. We pre-generate all the HTML pages and we serve them through the server directly to the user. In modern world, we use generators and templating systems like Jekyll and Hugo, and then we upload them on platforms like Netlify. But you can't realistically do this for larger websites or any website that requires a form of dynamicness, so user interaction and so forth. So you move on to a different way of handling this, and it's called isomorphic JavaScript. So In other words, you can call it pre-rendering or dynamic rendering. Different people at different levels call it differently. So the way it works is you create a cache of the page on the first request that goes out, or you pre-generate the page, and then you let the JavaScript handle the rest of it for the normal users. But essentially, every time, for example, a search engine calls your website, the pre-rendered version is served to the search engine, whereas for the user, you don't have to serve the pre-rendered version, although we still, at this moment of time, recommend users to serve the pre-rendered version because of cost of rendering for the users. And it's all very, very easy to do thanks to JAMStack. So with loads of platforms that most of us know, like Vue.js, Netlify, Next, Contentful, and they all work together. And of course, the king of them all, React.js. Now, JAMStack is built around JavaScript, APIs, and markups. Headless CMS that we hear about is essentially allows you to store your content on another platform, and it will handle your content and assets. And they generally even have APIs to compress and pre-process your images, videos. And some of the examples of this is Contentful and ContentStack, which is around quite a lot. And then you have your building and processing, which is the markup generator, such as Gatsby and Next.js. They're essentially there to handle your templating, all your comms with React, and they even do your pre-rendering if you do want them to do that. And finally, you have your hosting environments, such as Netlify, S3, and GitHub Pages, which essentially serve your static files that are generated. And from there onwards, then you will have platforms such as Lambda and Cloudflare sitting in front of them for additional bits that the standard JAMStack platform can't do. Now, talking about can't do, JAMStack also has its own problems. And generally, those issues are around architecture and platform engineering that causes problems for SEOs. I'm going to walk through some of the most popular platforms and share some tips for you on these. So GitHub Pages is where you're essentially generating your website through like Jekyll, and then the file is being saved into a GitHub repository, and then it's served from a GitHub page. I only recommend this for very, very small websites because it does not handle page duplication well, such as trailing slashes, and you cannot do 301 redirects because you cannot change the header response of the server. You can fix this through Cloudflare workers. And if you do want a sample code from me, I'll get in touch with me and I will share that with you. I've done this a few times for a few SaaS companies who generally tend to host their documentations on GitHub. You have AWS S3, which sits behind CloudFront, and then in some cases Lambda. Again, it's very similar in terms of issues to GitHub Pages, but through advanced engineering and all the other platforms that AWS and Amazon provide and functions that they provide, it is a flawless platform to work with, but it requires heavy engineering and almost over engineering some cases if you want to run all of this through. You can fix most of the issues, almost in fact all the issues, through AWS Lambda, where it sits on the edge and fixes the issues. And finally, you have Netlify. Now, Netlify is a little bit more different. It is designed for single page applications and static sites. It is probably the most complete package that you can get without having to over-engineer your entire website. You can use it for very, very large websites. It's almost issue free, and it provides something called Netlify functions, which runs on Lambda, or to handle niggly issues of JAMStack, or you can use Cloudflare workers to handle the bigger issues, which I will get to shortly. Now, given that Netlify is the easiest, I thought I would share some of the tips for SEOs on it. When your developers are working on Netlify, make sure when they are releasing the site and doing preview branches, they are blocking the preview branches. So you can put a code in there and say, if it's not a production version, please set the branch into no index, no follow, because otherwise Google will cache it and they will crawl it. Also on Netlify, I would suggest that you turn on your asset optimizations, because it handles your URL redirects for you automatically, handles CSS minifications, image compression if you go through their network. It's a little bit different if you do not use them as your main DNS provider. In that format, then you can't even put the website on .dev by a standard. It's a really, really good platform. But coming to this, the biggest issue with JAMStack is that it doesn't handle 404s for dynamic pages. What this means is that if you're trying to cache a page once it's been called by a user rather than pre-generated on the server beforehand, the server doesn't actually know if the page exists or not. And for 404 pages, it will just return a 200. So what you need to do on a JAMStack platform is you use edge functions such as Cloudflare workers, serverless on Netlify or Lambda to detect whether that page doesn't truly exist and return a 404 if it doesn't exist. And I guess it all comes down to whether this all works, because a lot of people are suspicious that if this works. So what I'm going to do is actually share some results with you. We have been recommending JAMStack and React.js as a front end to a lot of our clients for the last 2 years, and we have never seen any issues whatsoever. And the only issues we have seen has been when the developers and the engineers haven't carried out the work accurately as we've asked them to. So here is an example on a Fintech client, and they have a very, very high brand volume. You're looking at hundreds of thousands of searches, and we can see where they have moved on to React.js and the impressions going up from there. And I also have another client here, which is a SaaS client of ours, and they went on to a React site back in February, and straight away they started growing, and they have not seen any issues. I think the graph speaks for itself. So there is not much to say that it doesn't work. And if anyone's got any further questions on this, please do ask me and send me questions, and I will answer them. Thank you very much. And also follow me on Twitter if you want to know more of SPAs and JavaScript and anything else that you find.
Thank you very much, Reza, for giving us a whistle-stop tour around Headless, SPAs, and JavaScript. Does anyone have any questions in the chat they would like to ask Reza or to cover over whilst we've got 5 minutes out of the next talk? This is where some lift hold music would come in handy. No questions coming from the chat. Okay, thank you for the music, Jamie. So, okay, our next speaker is joining us from very early in his day. Apologies to Dan for that. Dan Leibson, who is VP of Search from Local SEO Guide. He's going to talk to us about automation and how through using it, they went from 0 to hero in just a few months. So Dan, over to you.
Awesome, thanks Dan. Let me get my screen going. Always happy to be here early in the morning for a fellow Dan, right? If Dans can't stick together in this crazy world, then what chance do the rest of us have? All right. So, hey everyone, like Dan said, I'm going to be talking about how you kind of went from automation 0 to hero, kind of roll you through this real quick. No. Oh, there we go. I have to click. Sorry, I'm not a Google Slides person. So just FYI, I'm Dan. I've been in search for 12 years. This is my daughter Harper in a Darth Vader mask. I'm the VP of search at Local SEO Guide. We're a full shop boutique local SEO agency. Thing that's known about me is I will buy you a beer. Hopefully that will happen someday and we can start meeting people in person again. But yeah, a little bit about me. And I have a 1-year-old. She's really cute and fat babies are awesome. This is my obligatory slide of client so that you have to listen to me. Okay, so relevant stuff for today on how going from, we went from nothing in automation to having a successful automation program. First of all, I am not a developer. Clearly, after listening to Reza's talk, you can kind of hear his background in some of the more technical pieces of SEO and development. And I don't have that. I have a graduate degree in political science and got into SEO during the 2008 financial crash. So, you know, I don't have any of that experience whatsoever and have taught myself coding kind of after the fact because kind of relevant to the second point, I have product experience running our internal tools at agencies I've worked at, right? So having the ability to be able to be communicative with developers and run like internal tools from a product perspective has kind of given me a relevant point of view to kind of help in this, I think. And then the kind of second part is I feel like I'm decent at the business of SEO. This isn't meant to be like a humble brag or anything like that, but just I think that this is like a relevant story for people to help them kind of like work and build their automation platforms. We recently open sourced a couple of automation pieces that I've gotten a lot of positive feedback from and have kind of convinced me to put together a talk like this, right? Because as kind of the thing that I hear back from people overwhelmingly is how did you do it, right? Like how did you create an automation stack or automation pipeline? And to be honest, it's a pretty hard process, right? And it requires kind of these things that I was talking about before, which is having some product experience or working to get it and focusing on the business of SEO, right? And so anyway, that's the story I'm going to tell you all today, and it's called Dan versus the World. So I spent a lot of time talking to people in large and small agencies to kind of see what they did with automation, right? Because I was kind of curious at how people were scaling a lot of really complicated technical SEO processes. Things like Lighthouse reports across millions of pages, performance reporting, large scale link footprints, all the stuff that kind of that people are talking about in the hip, cool SEO spaces these days related to automation and scale. And after talking to a bunch of people in agencies, the kind of big thing that I realized is one of the biggest problems with automation is the centralization, right? That there are lots of cool processes and ways to leverage coding and automation to make SEO's jobs easier, but they're usually isolated to teams, a particular technical SEO or a team lead or like a division head, right? There's very little centralization. And so that was kind of the first process I wanted to take off and kind of work to solve because I saw that as the biggest roadblock. So my first challenge was the CEO, right? If anybody knows anything about me or our business, the first place I went to is Andrew Schottland, our CEO, because it's you got to get that buy-in, right? Like this is where having product experience and working to kind of get your budget and focusing on the business helps you build actual automation, right? And so wanting to get budget from our CEO, I was just like, what's the best way I can work to kind of start leveraging and showing the value of an automation program? The solution, after a lot of thought, was honestly to build infrastructure, right? Like not hardware infrastructure or like cloud infrastructure or anything like that, but systems infrastructure so that we had kind of tools to be able to deploy in various different ways. The most important part of that is the kind of core of our automation platform, which is Node.js and Puppeteer, right? When we were looking for an infrastructure to kind of initially build, Node.js and Puppeteer made tons of sense, right? They have multiple use cases in our business. Not only can you use them for like crawling and scraping the web and also engaging in like form fills and stuff like that, but you can also engage in things like render and performance testing, which Reza talked about and Jamie will be talking about later. And so there's all these kind of both automation and like technical SEO processes you can use with this stack. Right, it's also super easy to scale. It's relatively lightweight. Like I said, you can scale it over thousands of pages, millions of pages, hundreds of sites. It works honestly quite well. One of our largest automation projects is on a Fortune 500 company that has 300 individual web domains, right? So and they have tens of thousands of pages apiece. So you can do all kinds of cool stuff over a large infrastructure or over a large footprint with Node.js and Puppeteer. Also, it's easy to iterate and develop, like to rapidly develop on, right? Like because it's an infrastructure. It is a rendering agent essentially that goes around and is part of Evergreen Chrome, right? And so you can do things like, well, actually, I'll put a pause on this and get to this in a second. Anyway, net built infrastructure. Showed it to Andrew, and this tweet is a kind of representative of some of the feedback he gave me, which is like, you know, you're just sitting here trying to work and improving our business, but in reality, this is like its own separate line of business. And so one of the things that we built out of this was able to drive revenue for our CEO, or revenue for our business, and make the CEO a huge believer in automation through opening up a separate business line, but also saved us a ton of time, which we'll get into later. So Dan versus the CEO. No way, Dan and the CEO, right? Like you get that buy-in, and now you have the beginning of organizational leadership moving towards centralized automation. Okay, so who's next in this game of getting buy-in and working to build an automation program? Oh, Dan versus the project manager. So we're a fully remote agency, which is, I think, something important to mention. And as a result of being a fully remote agency, we have dedicated project management in-house, right? It's just a relevant thing with being a remote business. So got to get that project manager buy-in, or at least I wanted to get that project manager buy-in, right? And you should all focus on getting buy-ins from people who run the operations in your organizations, right? You don't actually need to get that project manager buy-in, right? It's not required, particularly if you're like equal levels of position in the organization. You know, you don't have to do it, but it's incredibly relevant, right? Because one, they can be your biggest champion because you can get them tons of time savings and they're responsible to hours. But two, they can help you force adoption or generate adoption on all of your processes because they touch tons of stuff, right? So again, go to the organizational leadership for getting this buy-in and start working on proving the value of your stack to the people who are the real core decision makers. So, solution with the project manager. Just channeling that vanilla ice, right? And stop, automate, and listen. And this is really important, right? Because the project manager is going to have radically different goals than the rest of the organization. They're responsible for hours, right? Like they don't care about opening up new lines of business. They don't care about creating a new quality deliverable. I mean, they do care about all of these things, right? But they're responsible to hours. They're responsible to the projects. So, super important, right? Because this is one of the areas that people traditionally talk about automation in, right? There's tons of scale work being done for humans that's low quality and low value, that's ripe for automation. It frees up budget and team members for more challenging and rewarding work, right? Like this is where like kind of the traditional automation wins happen. However, there are some big problems here that you have to be worried about, right? Which is all of this operational infrastructure, the things that are part of your core processes that you're automating, those require support. Right? So now you have to start staffing support for everything that you build around your project manager. Otherwise, you're going to build systems that are going to break and then you're going to have fires and on it goes, right? This is a kind of core reason for centralization is it's easy to kind of carve off the support stack. Okay, so focusing on the project manager's needs. So what was the solution? Pretty simple. We built an auto poster, right? Like I had mentioned before, we had Node.js and Puppeteer. So we had the ability to kind of manipulate the web and web documents and do form fills and stuff like that. So we created an auto poster to post things to Google My Business. And so we were doing automated Google My Business posting for clients. This saved us tons of money. This was what the auto poster, this is what our project breakdown was before the auto poster, where it took us 100 hours for this particular sprint. After the auto poster, you can see it saved us about 50 hours net. And so major time savings by having the auto poster. Like I had mentioned earlier with the CEO, this was also opening up a new line of business, right? Now we had a tool to be able to sell people Google My Business auto posts. And so 2 wins, right? Time savings for the project manager, new line of business for the CEO. So, building that automation stack to service your existing needs, get that buy-in. Dan versus the project manager? No way. Dan and organizational leadership, right? And that's how you can work to kind of focus that automation stack and get it kind of deployed throughout your organization. Okay, the last one, and this is the one that I think most people kind of assume is going to be your biggest ally. They assume that this is going to be your best friend in focusing on automation. Dan versus the technical SEO. Let me tell you, they are not your best friend here. Thanks, Hamlet Batista, right? In the current SEO environment, one of the problems, like I mentioned before, in the way that automation and coding have negative impacts in SEO agencies is all the technical SEOs or SEOs want to learn how to be entry-level developers. SEOs are not developers, right? And when they do development, they generally do it poorly. This is a thing that is kind of surfacing now a lot in the technical SEO space, right? And so, your technical SEOs, or at least my technical SEOs and other SEOs, they want to be able to deploy this stuff themselves. They want to invest time in learning Python, learning scripting, and doing all this stuff. They don't want to help work building products that can help make it so that automation happens, to make it so that SEO and technical SEO analysis is easier, right? That's just not what they're thinking about. They're thinking about their job, not the organization. There's only one solution for something like that: overwhelming force, right? Like, you just have to show them that your way is the right way, right? Like, you have to show them that working through the organization is going to be the way to the technical SEO and automation success and do all the cool things that they want to, without having to take on a ton of extra responsibilities for their job. So what I did, I just started to make stuff and throw them at my technical SEOs, to be quite honest, in order to save them time on their jobs. So the first thing we did is, like I mentioned before, we built our initial infrastructure was Node.js and Puppeteer. And so one of the things that we use to build that with is to build a Lighthouse, scalable and aggregatable Lighthouse reporting stack. And so what this does is let you look at Lighthouse metrics from, or Lighthouse performance metrics from Google across an aggregated number of pages. And you can look at this screenshot here. We basically let you assign a category label to the type of pages. So you can see how performance works across page templates. You can see how assets work, like JavaScript or CSS or images work across page templates or holistically. So you can get a better view of their footprints. But basically, I made the technical SEO's job easier in terms of doing performance reporting, right? I made it so that they could just get a report, look through it, and surface a lot of the cool stuff. Great, easy to make their job easier. Keep going. Overwhelming force, remember? And so we plugged it into Slack, right? All of our automation runs through Dockerized instances of our scripting server. And so we have everything plugged into a robot named Jarvis in Slack. It basically lets our team members be self-serve with some of our automation. And so this allows my technical SEO to run a Lighthouse reporter for a particular site, get it back, get the Google Data Studio report generated, and be able to do their analysis. But seriously, you just have to keep leveraging that infrastructure. And I don't mean to beat a dead horse, but you got to beat your SEOs over the head with it very gently with phone bats, right? You got to make a GDS reports for everything, right? Like I mentioned, we use this Node.js and Puppeteer infrastructure in order to create a bunch of automation tasks and technical SEO tasks. So some of we use Data Studio as a front-end reporting for this so that our SEOs and team members don't have to log into BigQuery and the things that we use for storing data, blah, 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 blah. Anyway, the things that we've made available for our SEOs to use via Jarvis in Data Studio is a plugin to the SEMrush API in order to do keyword research at scale, in order to look at search footprints at scale, a plugin to the Majestic API in order to help us better build link footprints to help with our link building efforts. We have an ngram script in order to take a lot of the data we get through these various processes and bucket them into categories and get that spit back at you. Lighthouse reporting and auto posting, like I had said. And so this gives you the infrastructure, like I had mentioned, to constantly iterate. And your technical SEO is, they're the ones that are going to care more about how it helps them do their jobs, less about how it helps improve the business, right? And so this is where you really have to like put on your product manager hat and start thinking about what things that you need to keep pushing out. And so for the future, right, we're working on a few things right now to pull some really good data out of Search Console that you can't get via their API, and have a natural language processing process that we're working on right now that we're eventually going to get plugged into Jarvis. And so there's all this kind of cool stuff you can do once you have this infrastructure that you built with a really basic use case used to prove out the value of your stack across all your core roles, right? And get everybody to kind of be on board. So again, Dan versus the technical SEO, no way. Dan in the org versus the world, right? Like I had mentioned, I had spent a bunch of time talking to organizations about how they're doing this kind of automation. And I can tell you that most of them don't do it like this, right? That there's a huge opportunity for the organizations that can centralize their automation and like scripting stacks in order to drive success across the whole organization rather than in pockets of it, right? And so I'm happy to get my organization on board in order to start moving forward with this. Most importantly, though, is the SEO that's driving automation versus themselves, right? This is a fundamental shift in job roles for a lot of people. If you're working on championing automation inside your organization versus being an SEO, you need to kind of prioritize your time and training and how you level up yourself in order to be able to focus more on the business and growing your business of SEO rather than just creating cool SEO tactics and strategies, right? There's always a place for cool SEO tactics and strategies. And like I mentioned, it helps like get your SEOs on board to use your automation stack. But this is, when you champion this, it's honestly a fundamental shift for how you work in your organization and something that you always have to kind of worry about in terms of your time and your prioritization. I want to give a shout out to Brian and Sam. I don't do this on my own. Brian Heckler and Sam Capehart are our technical ops team. Sam's a full-time backend JavaScript dev, and Brian does our Python scripting and helps me with the product management. This is a group effort, and like when I say that it helps you build out a team over time, it really does. We also recently added Celia Fisher, shout out, as a junior product manager to help us push things live more and help us better focus our automation. TLDR, it all starts with infrastructure, and you got to get that bread. Thanks. You can check out our GitHub here. We're going to start posting more things. I have a new GSC thing we're going to launch in a couple of days. Hopefully this was helpful, and hopefully y'all are Scott Pilgrim fans.
Awesome. Thank you very much, Dan, for after reading the comments. A lot of people agreeing with what they're trying to push for developers and also what they're trying to do in terms of reporting. I've asked if people have got any questions. Corey has asked a question around Data Studio templates. So I'm going to add a second part to it as well. One, they've asked if access can be made available to any of the templates that you use. And secondly, what kind of advice would you give anyone who's probably starting off on this automation journey and starting to put together their own Data Studio templates or templates in other platforms? What would be your advice there? You're on mute as well.
Sorry, I was turning my computer audio on for the first part. Can you repeat the first part of the question?
Yeah, so Corey's asked around Data Studio access. So well, firstly, they've asked if if there's any access or you've got blog posts with any of these templates in. And then secondly, my part, just to expand on my question, is for those who might have just been inspired to go ahead and get on the automation journey and they're looking to build out their templates, what advice would you give them before they go into Data Studio and start dragging graphs around? What advice would you give them on how to get started?
Yeah, so one of the things that was like, it took me a while to wrap my head around on Data Studio is like what you can use it for other than generic reporting. And honestly, when you start warehousing your own stuff, so we warehouse everything in Google BigQuery, once you have that kind of like infrastructure in place to be able to slice and dice your Data Studio data as much as you want to, it opens up like a crazy world of possibilities, right? Like you can jam GSC data up in ways that you normally can't, right? Like you can look at index coverage status errors compared to Lighthouse metrics or compared to like the URL inspect tool. And so, just making sure you get all of the data in clean ways to be able to jam it up is, I think, that is super important. In terms of the first part of that question, though, in terms of templates, the Lighthouse Reporter is a blog post that's linked to in my deck that like we walk through like the use cases for it, have an example, and link you to the GitHub to be able to install it. So we try to open source that stuff to make it available.
Okay, no, cool. That's awesome. What I was going to say as well is, so in terms of like the data pulling together, is there any useful sort of third-party data and APIs you mash in there as well? Or is it predominantly a lot of a proprietary sort of Google Analytics Search Console and data from that respect?
Definitely SEMrush and Majestic. We're going to dump Ahrefs in there as soon as they have more stuff available via their API. One of the things that we're doing right now is the keyword blending, right? Like I'm sure you all do some of that too, but just like working with like the various data sources to like get a better source of what the real world is, right? Like particularly in the world we're in right now, where everything is lagging behind, right? Like there's no tool that can tell you what like the search world looks like right now.
No, I think a lot of people would agree with that. No, thank you very much, Dan. And I appreciate that you got up very early to come on and do this today with your new clean desk as well.
Thanks for having me.
No worries. So just before we go on to Jamie and her wonderful navigation as she shepherds us through the critical rendering path, there was a question asked for Reza, which I missed from Malcolm in the chat. So just going to retrospectively go back to that. And the question, Reza, was around isomorphic and whether or not it's a skill set that you find a lot of developers kind of already have out of the bag, or if it's something that they need to be coached on.
I find that a lot of new JavaScript developers who are coming into the market, strangely, they actually tend to know it more than existing developers. So if you're an existing developer from like the PHP days or anything else, ASP.NET and all that kind of stuff, they don't tend to be aware of it. But majority of the new day developers who tend to work purely on JavaScript or Node.js, they tend to have the knowledge. It's a mixed bag though, because it's all new still to this day, even though it's like 5 or 6 years old.
Thank you very much, Reza. Malcolm, if you got any other follow-up questions, I'm sure Reza will cover those in chat. So without further ado, it is my great pleasure to introduce Jamie Alberico, who, I'm being honest, when I asked to do this, it's purely because I spoke with her at Brighton last September, and she was amazing, and I'm selfish and I want her to speak again. So Jamie, over to you.
Thank you for all your kind lies and flattery. They're much appreciated. Good morning, YouTube. I hope everyone's having a wonderful Friday. And today I'm going to be talking a bit about our critical rendering path. This talk is for you if your site has been switched to mobile first index. Your site uses JavaScript, so you're part of the 95% that do. Performance is a ranking factor for your site, or you'd like users to convert in general. Do I have everyone in the audience now? Probably so. And if not, how did you find this channel? This talk is for me if I'm Jamie Alberico. I'm not a robot, but I speak bot. I'm a notorious blue-haired SEO who likes to talk about tech, so rendering, JavaScript performance metrics, or if you just want to play D&D sometime. We're going to talk about today what the critical rendering path is, how to measure it, and how to optimize it. Step one, what is this thing? Scary, scary technical words. Don't worry, it's not that bad. Critical rendering path is simply the steps your browser has to take to make a page, and more specifically, to make the content visible to the user. So For most of us, most experiences, that's what we already call above the fold content. Simple formula, yeah? We have a user, we have a screen, and we have some content. Shouldn't be too bad. Well, we typically think it's going to be like this. Real easy, broad strokes, huzzah. It ends up looking like this most of the time. This is the full page laid out for mobile. And you see I had to flip it to actually fit it fully on the screen. So when we talk about critical rendering path, we're talking about that initial viewport and what the user can see versus all of the luxurious content on your page that no one's going to stick around to see if it doesn't respond quick enough. Let's build it. Let's make a page. We'll pretend that we are browsers, that we are bots. And we're going to make our document object model, or DOM, our CSS object model, our render tree. We're going to do some layout, and then we're going to paint. Fancy word for putting pixels on the page. Step 1, build our DOM. So we start with our initial HTML. Most SEOs know that out there as our view page source. The HTML is red. It then goes through and grabs all of the resources needed to build that page, and it constructs the DOM. Here's a little bit of what that looks like. We have traditional elements like opening HTML tag, a head, a body. Step 2, make the CSS object model. This is where we take our style sheets, we parse them out, we develop style rules. It's important to note that we can make multiple style rules. We can override things. So while we may have a default value, say font size 16, we could override that with another style rule that says, no, it's bold, no, it's red, no, it's this. Step 3, make the render tree. We combine these two things together. We have the content that will be on the page, plus how it looks. So basic text on a page and how pretty it is. Not too bad. Step 4, make a layout. This is where we identify our requester and what their needs are. What is their viewport? Are they in portrait mode or are they horizontal? Then we begin to paint. Process of taking all of our rules, our pretty styles, adding it to the content we found in our HTML and building it out onto the page. Oi, what about JavaScript? I know I kind of teased and I promised here that this critical rendering path was the place where performance, JavaScript, and mobile first all combined together. Well, where was I talking about JavaScript in any of this? It was already all around us to begin with. JavaScript is a unique and precarious little beastie that can pop up in a number of places, even where you wouldn't expect it. So when we look at this from a performance perspective, our initial HTML response is that time to first byte. And when we get to our painting, we have got our first contentful paint. And I show you our above the fold render content here, and JavaScript actually can extend further out into that. So for sake of simplicity, we're going to leave that there. How do we measure this thing? Luckily for us, it's pretty well laid out for us. You don't have to go into DevTools. Honestly, DevTools is not really designed to be the most effective way for you to measure a critical rendering path. We have option 1, Web.dev. So we're all used to Lighthouse. We used to have these lovely little extensions, and then it became part of Chrome DevTools and the audits feature. And then you forgot to go ahead and disable an extension, or you had cookies enabled, and it became inaccurate testing and a waste of your day because, yeah, you had to do this all one by one. Web.dev goes ahead and does that for you. Make sure that we're replicating an adequate experience, an accurate experience. And you can track changes. Very lovely. You can download the results as JSON or HTML. So if you are doing this at the very start, you can learn by doing some one-offs. The cons for it, it's a one-off. So if you want to get that proof of concept out there to your dev team, get the buy-in, say, look at what we can do when we leverage this. Here you go. This is the output of what we get. Really quite lovely. There are scores. Those big numbers, of course, make our stakeholders pay attention. No one likes to see the big red sad. Everyone likes to see that big green happy. Option 2, be cool like Dan and automate with Lighthouse. Automation is cool. More tests or more data. More tests or less blind spots. You can slice and dice data in really fun new ways. You can store results and visualize the changes. Someone just posted a really cool notebook recently on taking this data and putting it into Google Data Studio. If you are an enterprise level, I recommend using a log file analysis tool, or visualization tool like Kibana, anything like that's very helpful. You can also test in lower environments. This is very, very handy. In a perfect world, SEOs aren't goalies. We're not perpetually trying to stop the bleeding. I like to call that a reservoir dog audit, because you're yelling at the site to say the words, you're not going to die. In this scenario, we get to find out in the lower environments, hey, did that new cool tool we added kind of add 5 seconds on how long it takes this page to load? If so, let's circle back on that. Some cons to it. You have to have a dedicated space. These files will build up. If you don't remove them and check in on them, things go cattywampus and sideways. There are great tutorials out there. I highly recommend it. Not as nearly as scary as it may sound. We get a great visual like this, thoroughly stolen from Dan's fantastic blog posts on automating these. Option 3. This one is so cool, guys. It really is, because you have real world data of the critical rendering path of user experiences on any page. And that's beautiful. You're not playing sampling games. You're not playing, hypothetically, this is what the emulated data looks like. No, this is real humans. This is like a bulked up version of the Chrome User Experience Report, but you have the responsibility here. You'll have the onus of not only installing this on every page type, but also keeping track of your data. Takes a code base, or everything is code base. Takes devs to do to every page. You have to track your own data. Very useful, but heavy lift, high impact. We can get some really cool milestones from this. So things like DOM interactive marks when the DOM is ready. DOM content loaded marks when both the DOM and our CSS object model are ready. If there's no parser blocking JavaScript, our DOM content loaded will fire immediately after interactive, and DOM complete marks when all of the pages and its sub-resources are ready. A lot of times we talk about performance in a number of ways. Everything from, well, my page loads in 4 seconds. What does that mean? To here's our time to interactive. And this critical rendering path ties back heavily to our performance metrics. So when I say you care about this talk, if your site is impacted by your performance, critical rendering path is another way of looking at the time to interactive. Time to interactive is part of that big happy score we saw in the Lighthouse bar earlier. It means the amount of time it takes for a user to not only see the content on that page, but to interact with it. And it's measured forwards in the viewport. So all of these things overlap together, and really a lot of us are talking about the same things in different ways. We all have very similar goals. So how do we optimize this malarkey? Now that we know about it, now that we hopefully care about it, don't block the rendering. The next time a vendor comes to you and goes, yes, my cube unicorn magic score will tell you everything about SEO on your site, just simply install this tag directly below the opening head. Tell them no, tell them not today. It's not a great time for you. If you're trying to message me right now, I can't see things. Cool. Don't know if you guys can see that. We've got 3 types of render blocking resources. First of which is going to be a script tag. So any tag in the head of a document that does not have a defer or async attribute. So every innocuous pixel, every call to a font bundle, all of it is going to have an impact here. Style sheets. CSS is inherently blocking. We have to go get that content. It's part of how we take what we know will be on the page, and then we turn it into what we know it will look like on the page. If your style sheet does not have a disabled attribute and a media attribute that matches the current device, it is blocking. Any HTML import that does not have an async attribute is blocking. This is one of those times where you can go ahead and flex your muscles with your dev team, pull this open, look in the head, and find out how many places do you have an opportunity to make your site a little bit faster by making it less reliant on external resources. Protect the head. It's a very important piece of your site. Everything from canonicals to Ahrefs, all in there. Title tags, every last bit of it. And if we have some of these blocking resources, like I mentioned before, that happen to be synchronous third party, that means that we are saying, okay, hold up, I'm just gonna go run and grab one thing real quick. If that third party that you have no control over takes too long to respond, this can result in the head prematurely closing. When that head prematurely closes, you have decapitated it. All the content that you deeply care about and you've worked so hard for optimization is now gone. And we have this spooky site. Keep our resources small. When we're bringing in the pieces we need to build the page, we bring more than we need to. It takes a while. It's bulky. Remember that Google is working from a mobile-first standpoint because the next billion users will be on mobile devices, and they will not be on deluxe mobile devices. They will not be on a infrastructure as many of us are used to having, and we are quite privileged to. So we want to keep our sites built for the next billion users who will have mid-range devices, such as the Moto 3G. They will be using throttled 3G networks. We can do this by taking the resources we have now and making them as small as possible. This isn't something you manually do as an SEO. This is something you cooperate with the dev team to do. There are some great tools out there like tree shaking, code splitting, minification, data compression. What we want to do is remove everything that doesn't contribute. So if you're packing for a vacation to go skiing, perhaps you don't need to bring a snorkel. Maybe you do. Maybe it's a very special mountain range, but it's a place where let's shake the extra weight. Let's get rid of things we don't need. Minification will be taking out all the comments, unnecessary spaces, nothing that will impact you as a user, and it's done in an automated way. We can also split up our bundles. Let's optimize them for what a browser is meant to use. Browsers are already optimized out of the box to go ahead and handle a number of things like creating our CSS object model, our direct object model, document object model. They are made for 1,600 nodes total. There's a spider about to run across my webcam, guys. He's making a cameo right now. It's optimized for these things. And when we go beyond that, we begin to make more calculations, take up more time. But let's split these out. Let's leverage basic technologies like HTTP2. That gives us multiplexing. We get to make multiple requests rather than having a single queue. It's a bit like when you are in line somewhere, there's only one teller open and then someone else opens up. It's very lovely for all involved. We're going to avoid critical request chains. This is the example of what you'll see using Web.dev as output. They do a lovely job of telling you exactly what's going on here. To put it in a little bit more context, what you're seeing right now is called a request map. It's a visualization of every request needing to go ahead and make a page. This is not a particularly healthy page. A request chain is when our site has a third-party script, and that script calls a script, and that script calls a script. And then finally, that goes ahead and grabs some pretty icons and stuff. So this new functionality you may have added because it had some really cool bells and whistles. It's a long path to get to those bells and whistles. And it may be worthwhile considering, is the impact of this feature on my site's performance worth what it provides? You can objectively measure this. Go ahead and look at your KPIs, figure out how much each second of load time added reduces your conversion rate. There's real numbers behind this, and those get attention a lot better than a softball argument of maybe we shouldn't block the entire page for 5 seconds. Who knows? Load only what you need. The best way to optimize a critical rendering path is to not load things. To remove what is not beneficial to us. So if we want our page to load in 5 seconds for that next billion users, on a 3G connection, we have about 1.5 meg total for our page size. That's it. We need to make this quick. Every script you call, whether it actually does anything on the page, has to go through a whole series of actions. When that's JavaScript, that takes up a whole thread. That means nothing else gets to work. When we look at our thing we call crawl budget, that's made of threads. If we've occupied our threads with useless JS, perhaps a search engine wouldn't be so kind as to invest their technical debt in our site. If we do need a resource, only download it once. Best practices, we want to keep JavaScript, CSS, everything below about 500 kilobytes. We don't want to repeat ourselves. So happy path world, we've got one CSS file. I'm not going to go into JS because that comes down to how your site executes it. And we want to reuse things as long as possible. If you go ahead and you were to look at your main thread processing and you see something like this, be terrified and tell someone, because we're going ahead and executing resources that are taking a long time. When you see this level of complexity in scripting, perhaps it's because we're writing something, then rewriting it, then rewriting it, then rewriting it. It's a good, easy way built into our dev tools to look at if we are shipping scripts that are not necessary. And that is in Chrome Dev Tools, clicking on those three dots, going to more tools, going to coverage. When we go ahead and do this, we can see how much of each script was used. If you see a very robust bundle, that's half a meg in itself, and it's 98% unused. This is the time to go ahead and work with your team. Let's look at ways that we can build into our release process, removing code that is not useful and minimizing that which is. Prioritize what we load when. This bottom one here, this is the idea of it'll all come together at once, but you have to wait longer on those moments, those seconds where a user's thumb is hovering over the back button, or they're really tempted to go open Instagram. They might not come back. You are losing their attention. You are losing their conversions. When we optimize our rendering, we load what matters when it matters. No one cares about your footer when they haven't seen anything available to them in the first place. We can skip requesting our resources for CSS to get that visualization of what we've already put in the HTML by inlining it. So when we inline it, we're actually going to make a statement of saying, hey, this content above the fold, this is blue, it's this size, this is bold. By doing that, there's no wait for the CSS to come back. Quick, on the fly, great experience. We should inline this content for the initial viewport. So again, the above the fold content, that which we see in initial page load. And the CSS should appear before you make calls for external style sheets or JS. Important little technical nuance. We want to cache these as long as possible. If you had to go through all the trouble of executing all these scripts, and then you had to do it again every single time, you as a human or bot may find it a bit tedious. Best option here is to go ahead and once we've gone through that effort, use it, keep using it. So extended max age can be used on JavaScript and CSS resources. Each resource should explicitly state its caching policy. It should answer, can it be cached? Who can it be cached by? How long? And how often they should check to see if any changes have been made. We can do this really cool version compare. We go ahead and leverage our cache control and e-tag headers. Cache control defines how long and how resources can be cached for browsers and intermediate responses. So CDNs, pieces like that, very useful to us. Our e-tag is a revalidation token. Basically, we have a sequence here and a sequence here. If these two match, we reuse. If they don't match, then it's time to go ahead and fetch a fresh copy. Most important piece to this, make allies. This is not something that you will win on your own. And every member of your team and our community, we have the same goals. We want to make a better web, want to reach more users, and have a pretty fun time doing silly webinars with good folks at SALT. Thank you, guys.
Thank you very much, Jamie. That's every time I hear you speak, I come away probably learning as much as realizing as twice as much I don't already know. It's wonderful.
Me too.
So I've had a couple of questions in the chat. Both have been described as tangential. So one for you, Jamie, and then one which I'm going to open up to the board. So you talked about, so it's mainly around the mobile first. Obviously, the next billion users won't be on as great a networks and infrastructures as what we're on. What do you perceive the impact potentially of the future of wider spread 5G availability being, and how much of an impact will that have on the importance of clean code?
Do you want me to go ahead and go on a tangent right now? You don't need 5G. What you need is to ship what you need. Stop being so gluttonous. 5G networks involve a lot of infrastructure expenses that a lot of people can't get to. We want to have the internet. I want to have the internet be a place where anyone can access information, can help make solutions, can help make their communities better, can help make their world better, their own lives better. And if it's reliant on you really wanting to ship something stupid, don't do it. Make smaller code, please.
So make the payload lighter, don't build a bigger plane, essentially.
Yes.
Yeah, not a problem.
Everyone loves being sweet, you know. It's the all-you-can-eat buffet, but maybe let's make the most of what we have.
I agree with you there. So the second question also from David, and this I'm going to open up to the floor. Jamie, you can go first if you'd like. So obviously priority on mobile first. Obviously with the next potential billion users, mobile devices are probably going to be their main device for actually accessing the internet as a whole, and not just as a communications device. This is very tangenty to everything else, but it's around voice search. And given that mobile is one of the supposed main drivers of voice search, how do you see that playing out in the role of the future?
Screenless search. I mean, that's the result of knowledge graph. To get your knowledge graph, you've got to be one of the first 10 results in a SERP to get that additional processing in play. Be good at what you're doing and be lightweight and performant on it. Contribute more value that can fit in a knowledge graph. Hey.
Awesome. Thank you. Dan, have you any thoughts on voice search and its potential impact or screenless search?
I am like the world's biggest voice search hater and wrote a blog article called Voice Search and SEO Go Together Like Peanut Butter and Sardines. So like, I agree with everything that Jamie said. Of course, that's like all reasonable, totally sensical stuff, right? But like, as everybody here and listening knows, like it's hard to get them to like voice search to play the right song you want it to play sometimes, rather than doing a web search for that song. So like until that's fixed, right, we're gonna still have some problems.
I mean,
feel like I've got. Oh, you go right ahead.
Go for it. No, I mean we've got voice search. We don't use it, but if you look at like the Z generation and everyone else, a lot of them are using voice search. So there is that argument that voice search is going to become bigger and bigger than ever. So making sure you do have your knowledge graph right is pretty important, and use speakables where you can, because that will get picked up eventually, and then people are searching on their Alexa every day. I mean, I bought one and now I'm turning on and off the lights all the time, putting cat noises and asking questions, and I'm getting answers back from Alexa. So yeah, a voice search is going to become really, really big.
Yeah, I would actually bet against it, in all honesty. We have a client that we did a bunch of work for Fandango, and we helped them work with them to build a voice skill for Alexa, right? It makes tons of sense for them because they're a place where you can transact movie tickets. And so like that, again, that makes tons of sense. But like, if you like heard the like local search discussion about what voice search looks like, right? Like it's just, it's like marketing technologism, right? It's not about like what you're talking about, like recipes or stuff like that, or like how my daughter uses it, right? Or how like Jamie uses it, or it's like this, it's not a discovery platform, I guess is a good way of saying it.
I don't think it's there yet, but I do think it's like a lot of things where once you have enough data, you hit a threshold where it begins to become more effective, and it's learning every day on itself. I still appreciate every day that I made a custom action of stop judging me, which has my Google Home continue Netflix. Yes, I'm still there.
Yeah, I saw that on Twitter. Jamie, that's actually a pretty good idea. Malcolm Slade, Epiphany's just gone into the chat and actually said, so the differentiation between obviously voice search and how we may use voice search just for action-led things, like Reza said, for lights, cat noises, fart noises, generally just calling between rooms because we're lazy. but it's the informational side of things and just the general quick usage, which he believes might become big in some regards. Dan, we know your thoughts on this.
I totally agree with that, right? Like I use it for cooking all the time.
So it is quite important to have it then.
Well, I mean, what we're talking about is like good basic SEO stuff and getting your knowledge panel right? So like, yeah, you should do that if you're an SEO.
Yeah.
No worries. Thank you very much. So does anyone else in the chat have any questions at the moment? We're about 15-20 minutes ahead of schedule out from when we're going to be joined by John Mueller. So any questions, or if the panelists have any questions for each other from the talks today?
Oi, Dan, what have you been up to? I haven't seen you on stage in a minute.
That's because everywhere I was going to be speaking, Jamie cancelled.
I know, I had 6 cancel. Oh, my poor rolling luggage thinks I've abandoned it.
Well, the last time I spoke in the States, my luggage didn't turn up. So that's probably there now, actually. Thank you for TJ Maxx. That saved my life that trip. But no, so I was going to be speaking at a conference in Paris a week and a half ago or so, looking at Google Discover, because that for me is probably going to grow faster than what voice search is, just because it's prominent. Google are forcing it visually. We're quite visually human. As humans, we're very visual. We're a little bit magpie-esque in the sense we like the shiny thing. And because the AI on it is getting quite clever, it's getting good at knowing which carrots to dangle and which carrots are going to get bitten quite quickly. It'd actually be interesting to hear what your guys' thoughts on Google Discover currently is.
I mean, to me, it is pretty amazing. Like a couple of our clients, whenever they publish their blog posts and articles, we tend to see literally hundreds of thousands of users going through it through Google Discover. Yeah, I have personally not used it. I mean, I'm not an Android user, so it's a little bit different to me. But I do want to hear everyone else's thoughts on it, those who've actually used it properly and who actually uses Google Discover.
So I agree. I'm an Apple user, but like it's the same thing. We see clients just like crushing it with Google Discover, and it's one of the things that we want like more detailed reporting on and to like do more testing on. So I'm kind of curious what your thoughts are on juicing the Google Discover.
Yes, I mean, I wrote a piece in Search Engine Journal. I think it got published like a week, 2 weeks ago. And Brody Clark, who, if you don't follow him, he's a wonderful Australian SEO. He's been doing a lot of poking with data and testing at the same time. And essentially, it's kind of down to just producing really great content and knowing your audience really well. His studies also found like really great imagery, and unique imagery works very well, and his tests correlate to much better performances. The kind of stuff we're seeing is basically just it's kind of down to the old adage of what we should be doing really as SEOs anyway, and that's driving content which adds value, isn't clickbaity or tabloidy in the sense that they've managed to make a 500-word article when 2 words would do, kind of level stuff. And also, interestingly, with some of the papers that Bill Slavsky shared, and especially some of the news around author and authorship vectors, actually how important just being topically relevant for that actually works. So say like Bed Bath & Beyond, if they suddenly started talking about car tires, they're not really known for that. So it's having that topical relevancy as well is kind of a big player.
What do you think about social shares? What do you think about Twitter? What do you think about that kind of the way that plugs into Google Discover? We've done a little bit of playing around with that, and it's actually very interesting.
So obviously Google, I mean, I think it's like 6 years now, the fire hose deal's been in place, something like that. Mm-hmm. I kind of feel like in terms of, and this is where the distinction I feel needs to be made, in terms of general search, and if we talk about the traditional querying, blue links and some featured snippets, the social share element potentially doesn't impact the order of those blue links, but what it does in my opinion, feed into is the parts around the knowledge graph of, well, that's clearly, I mean, because obviously in the world of fakes, obviously blue verifications and things as well, but the real entity will be shared more than those which are not, well, the pseudo entities. So that helps differentiation process. When it comes to Discover, I kind of feel that the social shares, especially around Twitter and potentially around LinkedIn, depending on what Google's capabilities are of harvesting my data and how much technical resource I put into that, that kind of could be seen as kind of like the links of Google Discover, because if a really popular article goes live, you then, obviously a lot of social shares means that it's been well received, and people don't share bad articles, they don't share things that aren't relevant. But then what I think that also then does is say that magazine or publication gets that gravitas, when they then publish something on a similar topic, they've already been deemed a subject matter expert for that topic. So they probably stand a better likelihood, even without the social shares, on that second or third piece that they got on the first to appear and Discover.
Yeah, I'll tell you that, like, I get a good amount of Google Discover traffic for some of our stuff that I write on our blog. That doesn't make any sense to me why it would get Discover traffic, other than like the amount of social pickup it gets, right? Like there's nothing happening with it like day of release to get any of that pickup, right? And it's harder to tell on brands, right? Because they're, like you say, they're getting so much Discover all the time. But I really want to do some like serious testing around the way Twitter plays into it, because it's really piqued my interest.
I mean, Twitter's finally indexable, so.
Yeah. I mean, I definitely do think that the data from a Firehose will probably, if any of the social media platforms do play a part, there's a tunnel between those two. So just for Google to harvest that data potentially will be a lot easier than having to go out and get it themselves in a more, what's the word I'm looking for, not robust, traditional way of collating that kind of data, especially since a lot of social plugins just removed the standard numbers next to things, and because of how many sites artificially inflate their social share numbers as well. I mean, I run like a little small Yandex news site, and in the back end of a template I actually bought, I can enter a false number for social shares, like as standard. So that data is probably just so manipulatable, it's not worthwhile, but the Firehose definitely probably has a place. And yeah, again, big enough to use Twitter to do that, but then I also think that then plays into the authorship vector, because real people get follows, real people get shares, real people get spoken to. So if that person continues to speak in the same vector, then it stands to reason that even though pieces don't directly get the shares, the impact, that there is a correlation between them performing well.
I think that Google will be missing out if they take Twitter Firehose data and aren't plugging it into any of their machine learning, NLP, or AI stacks, right? Like that's a real missed opportunity right there.
I don't see how they wouldn't be. I mean, if we just look at how we've treated the nofollow, they have treated the nofollow attribute. It's gone to a contextual signal because all interlinking provides context. The idea of us having knowledge and authority. Huh. If you're a health site and you also have ads playing for perhaps less health-centric voices, it might show that contradiction and the willingness to be a content farm.
Yeah, no, 100%. And also, it's also one thing I'd like to do kind of a test around is the supplementary article sponsors you can get without naming the names of them. But when you go down to the bottom of a publication site and there's an amazing person who can get white teeth in your area, and it's on a national publication, that kind of stuff. Interesting to see.
Well, you get white teeth in your area, you're doing good.
Yeah, good part of Yorkshire. But it just how that works and then factors into it as well, because obviously it's going to be rendered in HTML. You can render in the article just to see that impact. I had a question from the chat, probably taken off again from Malcolm. Does anyone see a time where Google will serve informational content itself based on common consensuses? So I kind of feel this probably then relates a little bit to what we're seeing now with what's going on in the world, that a lot of platforms are putting that content to the top of like certain pages and making it accessible. And similarly, during like major sporting events, Google and other platforms do similar. Do you see that potentially becoming, as more data is being gathered and data is oil, that kind of becoming more commonplace for Google?
Data surpassed oil 5 years ago. Yeah. Scary but true. I think it's there. We've got fact-checking schema. It's already in play. The concept of understanding authority. It's all tying back to Wiki Commons, Wikidata. Google has a big vested interest in that. That's why we see so much of it in the SERP. And the COVID. If you go to the Doodle right now, the link is for COVID response and for live data. We're very much approaching that. If anything, our current state has accelerated the need.
No, definitely. Dan, Reza, any thoughts on that?
The same exact thought. It's all.
Get out of my head, Reza.
Dan.
No worries. Got a question for Jamie come up, and obviously this can be open for Reza and Dan as well. Do you have any tips around script execution time?
Well, that's an ambiguous.
Like to improve
You like the ones?
execution time.
The time should be quantifiable. Yes. Beyond that, context is important. Many scripts.
I guess in terms of execution time and improving it, do you have any tips around how we can find issues and where the script is using up time and how we can then improve it?
Oh, absolutely. That script coverage tool, when we see there's a ton that's not being used, all of that has to go through processes before it can be used. CSS is going to recalculate infinitely if you let it. So the idea of let's go through and get rid of what we don't need. We want to cruft it. So we were really big on crufting content for a long time. It's time for us to cruft our code. If we have features we're no longer using, I know everyone's like that's tech debt. No, that's the foundation of your site. And we might want to add new features in, but that's a bit akin to adding a new guest bedroom on your beach house when the foundation of said beach house is made of bottles that washed up on shore. It's not structurally sound. And no matter how fancy you make it, it will probably disappoint and maybe even break off into the sea.
Thank you for a very graphic metaphor there, Jamie.
It's my specialty. This is my English major in use. Curtsy.
I just like how the fact we've had a JavaScript talk and we've had decapitation worked into it. So in regards to then execution, so obviously working with multiple sites, what are the main sort of common offenders you come across? Because I mean, some of these ones that spring to my mind are things like a lot of like UX testing softwares which are put on and then used and then never let go, live chat. Yeah.
A/B testing platforms are a great concept. If you are executing this client side, it is the Heisenberg principle. By interjecting that observer into there, you are skewing the results. In a previous life, I worked with a number of those doing A/B testing and found that one was blocking the site for up to 5 seconds until we had that third-party response. So remember, kids, every time you allow another site to block your content rendering, you are fully trusting them. Do you really know them that well?
Do you trust how Google Tag Manager works? Would you trust that loading all the other scripts around, even your internal stuff?
That's a great question. Okay, so if you are loading a ton of analytics and other scripts via Google Tag Manager and just the out-of-the-box ones, if those are sending auto event listeners and you're trying to execute scripts on your site at the same time you're building it, every auto listener is stopping. It's blocking for a second. So be really careful. Ask yourself, am I actively using this data? Can I consolidate? Am I being a hoarder?
That's pretty good, because I see that quite a lot nowadays. Like I see a lot of websites, implement like Google Tag Manager, and then they start loading like another software like Segment, which does the loading of another software. So you see these chains of scripts coming in and blocking everything, and then they go, why is my site so slow? Also, I see quite a lot of like these chatbots that they've got, like Drift, for example. I don't know, many other ones as well at the same time, and they tend to slow everything down if it's not implemented correctly, and they're just not post loading it. They're not waiting for the entire page to execute and then just load after, either on click or on interaction. So it's one of the issues that I tend to see quite a lot, and people should be quite aware of it.
Agree. If it's there to go ahead and gather helpful information or be an add-on, it gets to wait. Prioritize, when is it useful?
Excellent.
A great question, Reza, and great insight back as well, Jamie. So I just appreciate because Dan hasn't spoken for a little while. Not this Dan, the other Dan. We need more Dan. I appreciate you gave, like, you spoke on Bright Local yesterday, and just while we're hanging out for John to join us. With local and what you're seeing at the moment, especially around sort of obviously GMB and reviews, and that's just, it's not a bottleneck, it's just a hard stop at the moment on everything else. What kind of challenges are you seeing outside of that with local, and how do you feel the local sort of side of things will almost recover or change once we're out of this crisis?
Yeah, it's hard, right? Because we don't work with a lot of SMBs. We do like local to us is like directories, marketplaces, and some national brands. And so like we don't have anybody that's totally closed for COVID, for example, right? Like, you know, big retail, big box stores are open. We don't work with like Best Buy or anything like that, right? The clients that we work with are still open. And so it's all about like navigating this crazy, wild world, right? Like where you're like the front line of customer support and entry for a lot of people to like the real world, right? And like they don't have any of this, like brands don't have I mean, I'm sure you all have the same experience. Brands don't have good local search experience in-house, right? It's almost always run externally by agencies. And so it's not often a core competency of like their business messaging, right? And so that's kind of been like a giant pain for the world right now. And then, you know, marketplaces are just like pushing crazy updates trying to stay alive right now.
How have you found managing, it's obviously because it's a larger scale rather than it's probably one or two sort of free bricks and mortar locations, how are you finding basically the uptake really of implementing things like the COVID scheme, implementing specifically like the Google COVID My Business updates, so the posts on Google My Business? How are you finding, or how are you handling that really across such a large scale?
That's why I built a GMB auto poster as one of my first pieces of automation, and able to in order to make it so that we could scale that rapidly, right? So like we had a GMB auto poster. Google just released the ability to do posts for brands in the API like 2 days ago or something like that, in order for brands to be able to manage their messaging. And so then the teams have to take an internal API sprint to be able to like hook that up to their systems and be able to deploy posts at scale. We've had that capability for like a month, right? Like a month and a half. And so like our clients have been posting updates about COVID since 2 weeks ago, regularly and automated. So yeah, we've been handling it really well. Build automation tools, right? Like.
Awesome, great stuff. Does anyone else in the chat have any questions? Matt Lequester says that you should definitely try the ponytail out, by the way. Just let you know about Dan. Does anyone else in the chat have any questions? Oh dear. Or any of the panelists have any questions for each other? Just ask for hanging on for the next 2-3 minutes.
Matt, you were supposed to hit me up about something for your org. Hit me up. Andrew told me to bug you if you didn't hit me up this week.
That's probably one of the best follow-up and chasers that I've ever seen live on YouTube.
Andrew, my CEO, and Andrew's Matt's CEO are good friends.
No worries. Jamie?
Does anyone in the chat want to correct anything I've gotten wrong? I'm not intentionally doing it, but I feel like half of getting out here and being part of the SEO community, and particularly in tech, is going, I'm probably going to be wrong at some point, but I'm going to learn by stepping up to it. So if you have corrections, please send them to Jamie at Not a Robot.
Also, please let me know who that person is so I can follow them on Twitter.
Yeah, strangely, as Jamie said, for about 8 people left reviewing. So we ran.
I write people off?
I don't know what to do with that. So, okay, I'm just going through the chat to see if I've missed anything. Ashley says, you're never wrong. Ashley Burnhale. I appreciate saying Ashley. There's multiple Ashleys in the world.
She's my life partner, so that doesn't count.
No problem. Does anyone else in the chat have any questions for the current panel? No, Ashley's just said we're all learning wicked smart things from everyone. From you all, but I can't do the y'all.
Y'all.
Yeah.
No, I really lean into it. I want to hear your best Southern syrup accent, Dan. Come on.
I agree. I want to hear it.
I don't think the internet needs to know that on a recorded basis.
I think that we need to hear it. You draw out the syllables. It's about like y'all. It's about slow.
Like pull it from the jaw. Y'all.
Yeah. Let's hear it.
Oh, I knew I was going to lose my career one day, wasn't it, over here? Y'all. Yay.
Oh, there you go. That last one. Yeah.
That was good. That was really good.
I've enjoyed being an SEO. No worries, guys. So next on the webinar, we have got John Mueller joining us. Just waiting for him to pop in to start the call. He's in the chat, so I think he's coming. He has said everything is awesome though, so he's watching. Does anyone have any questions else in the meantime? Ashley's put wife in capitals for you, Jamie.
Love you, boo.
Good stuff. Making sure all the links are right.
You can see John is definitely there watching on the YouTube, but he hasn't joined the actual Zoom talk that we have on this side.
Yeah, he's
That's right, guys. John is the lurker. He's the lurker king. He's always watching. He knows where you've link spammed.
Fair enough.
The trick is to never watch any of your videos. That's how you can make it through saying y'all and decapitation.
Yeah, to be fair, I've never watched any of my own videos back, mostly because I hate the sound of my own voice. But whilst we're just waiting for John to join, what do you feel? Obviously, the world at the moment has gone crazy, but when we kind of come back to normal, potentially ahead of sort of a Black Friday, Cyber Week, Thanksgiving, and Christmas, all the good e-commerce kind of times of year, what do you think will be some of the most important things to focus on? Not particularly probably from an SEO perspective, but just from getting the online side of things back on track. What do you guys feel be the most important, one of the most important things to focus on? Jamie?
Oh, wait, why is it me? I feel like Reza and Dan need to step it up here.
Yeah, left to right, Reza.
Right. Okay. The first things first. I think John's struggling to actually find the link to Zoom. He's just on YouTube. So if you can just message him. Oh, there he is. Hello, John.
Hi.
Hi, John. Thank you for joining us.
Yeah, good to be here.
Good, great stuff. Thank you. I appreciate, obviously, it's evening now in Switzerland, so I do appreciate you taking time out.
No problem.
And I'm not sure how much the last couple of hours you caught, but we've had a lot of JavaScript discussion. Let's continue on.
Yeah, no, I think JavaScript is a fascinating topic. And it's like so many sites are switching to JavaScript. So it's something where I think the SEO community overall has picked that up and kind of run with it. And it's really cool to see this, I don't know, the whole more technical side of SEO being so much more in the foreground now again.
No, definitely, and especially the new found relationships we're building with developers, and not as much making them allies, but just like having them part of the same party, and the skill sets being crossed and learned between us. No, definitely. So just to kick off, so if someone has got to this YouTube live stream and has taken a wrong turn and doesn't know who you are, would you just please introduce yourself for us?
OK. I'm a webmaster trends analyst originally at Google, which means so what we try to do is connect the people who are making websites externally, like people like you who are working on improving websites overall, with the internal teams that are working on search functionality. So that's sometimes people who are working on the crawling, indexing side, sometimes different search features. And by connecting the two sides, we want to make sure that the information that we have internally goes out to y'all externally. And the information that y'all provide comes back into the teams internally as well.
My career is definitely over. So for the past few days, I've been reaching out on Slack, Reddit, and Twitter. I'm just basically asking for some questions from the good folks, something which you do day in, day out. And as a community, we do thank you for it, because just the sheer tsunami of notifications you must get. And if you're an inbox zero person, that must be an insurmountable challenge. So what I've done is I've collated some of those questions into sort of more comprehensible ones, and just some ones which I feel a bit more interesting. Also ones which I've not really seen being asked on Twitter that much. So we won't be asking about subfolders and subdomains and other little things like that. So one of the things I wanted to start off with, which is share some insights on, is this is a conversation that comes up a lot, especially with more international clients or clients who obviously work in multiple markets. And it's more of the developers who ask this question, and I feel it's just because a lot of the old information might be slightly outdated, or not from Google, but from third parties, and that's around hosting. Because obviously a lot of large companies will have a single website and then build off branches off a single database. How much, and obviously we now have CDNs, we have edge networks, everything else. How much does hosting really have an impact in sort of how Google perceives a site's relevance for specific markets in 2020?
I'd say very little. If it's something where we don't know a lot about the site, then sometimes the hosting gives us a little bit of a guess. But as soon as we know a little bit more about the site, then we can, on the one hand, figure out which locations are relevant on our own. And also we can use a Search Console setting where you can set geo-targeting. And essentially with that information, we have a lot more information than just the hosting location. So it's like from my point of view, I wouldn't worry about the hosting location. I would pick one that works well for you, that's kind of fast, good, strong hosting, that's secure, that's kind of regularly updated, and work with that. And if you're using a CDN, you have essentially hosting everywhere anyway. So from that point of view, the location itself is really secondary.
Okay, no, thank you. So things like obviously hreflang, other on-site signals, and other things, just make it so hosting good for users and just let the technical do the heavy lifting in that regard. Yeah. Thank you very much. So the second one which I've pulled together, and this is kind of SEO also meeting other parts of the development world with cybersecurity. We know that obviously good search results are secure search results, and we know that is part of Google's agenda with pushing HTTPS and making sure transactions are encrypted, especially with transport layer, and the deprecation of other TLS through Chrome updates, especially. How plausible would it be for, say, in the future, Google to introduce a form of passive scanning to how it crawls websites? Because obviously at the moment there's detection of things like malware, phishing, but with things like the OWASP top 10 being quite easily detectable when fingerprinting platforms, how feasible is that, or is it on Google's agenda at all?
I think that's kind of tricky So one thing we do sometimes do is watch out for CMS versions. So especially if we're aware of bigger security issues in certain CMS versions, and we can recognize that like in the header of the pages, then that's something we'll flag through Search Console. That's fairly easy. Kind of more intrusive scanning of things like are there XSS issues, those kind of things. That's something which is a bit tricky because you're almost attacking the website by checking to see if something happens there. So that's something where I know the security team would love to do more in that direction, but it's kind of a legal nightmare, I imagine, to navigate that and say, well, like people have to opt in for it. And at the same time, if people are opting in, then they're already aware of a lot of these issues anyway. So it's kind of a tricky situation there. But I don't know. I mean, it depends on how things evolve with regards to security. But it's something I wouldn't say we will never do. But it's tricky to just go out and kind of do, I don't know, security scans of the web to see what all happens.
No, so there's kind of follow-ups about and based on something you said earlier on, because I know there'll be people asking this. So if you can detect the CMS version and you know there's potentially issues with that which you'll flag by Search Console, would that affect a site's potential ranking performance in any way if you know it's running a potentially threatened CMS?
No. I mean, it's kind of tricky to determine if it's really running that version of a CMS too, because sometimes people will use some kind of static hosting and they'll essentially clone the content of an older WordPress CMS onto static hosting, for example, and then it's like, oh, you're running WordPress, but actually you're not running WordPress. So just because it's in the header somewhere doesn't mean that it's really that CMS with that version.
So a soft flag in Search Console, but not a direct ranking impact. No, yeah. Thank you. So one of the third questions, which if this is something I've been asked a lot, and I think it might be, well, especially by clients, I think it might be spurred on by potentially misconceptions around things like semantic vectors, EAT, and how the whole keyword structure works. And that then goes into sort of a very basic information architecture and URL structure world. And that then goes down to the site structure. So I know there's a whole thing at the moment where if you just do like website.com/blog and then have the article up there, does it matter to Google, or will it see higher contextual relevance if you then start introducing categories to the URLs to say this is a blog, this is a category, this is an article, or are they both pretty much the same in Google's eyes and it looks at other signals for that relevancy?
It's both pretty much the same. So I think it's good to, in general, focus on making clean URLs that are kind of understandable. But especially when you're looking at mobile phones where most people are browsing, people tend not to see the URLs anyway. So most of the time, I imagine the people who see the URLs are mostly the people who are running the website, which is kind of weird situation, I guess. But if you have clean URLs and we can pick those clean URLs as canonicals and we can show those in search, it's a lot easier for you to track. It's a lot easier to double check when things go wrong. So with that in mind, that's something where I would opt to focusing on URLs and making sure they're kind of good, but I wouldn't expect the URLs themselves to drive any specific ranking effect.
That's a very comprehensive answer. Thank you. So moving on to another one, which, and this is kind of Jamie covered a lot of this in regards to her talking about critical rendering path, and that's around speed performance. And I'm going to go back a couple of years here. So SMX Munich in 2018, if we can do the sort of time warp effects now, and flash vaccine. You said that Google was using performance data aggregated from opted-in Chrome users as a sort of a data point in evaluating site speed and its effectiveness as a signal for rankings. So my twofold sort of point around this is those who missed Munich 2018. Could you elaborate on what that was? And then secondly, has that process changed much in the last couple of years?
OK, that was from before we were locked inside, right?
Yeah.
It's like the previous world. It's like, oh, man, we should just go back in time. It was so much nicer back then. Let's see. I think the part that specifically referred to is the use of the Chrome user experience data, which is something that I believe is generally collected through that mechanism and also made available in, I think it's available for pretty much all sites to kind of look at as well. I don't know exactly where that goes in. That's also visible in I believe, the page speed insights reports when you have kind of the site overview, and also in Search Console in the speed report that they have new. It also uses kind of the similar data of people who are opted in to determine like what are people actually seeing. And from a ranking point of view, we use essentially two parts with regards to speed. On the one hand, the various kind of lab tests where it's like you're running these speed tests on your machine with a good internet connection, and it's more about the theoretical performance. And on the other hand, we have the field data, which comes from places like the Chrome user experience data, where we see what people are actually seeing with regards to your site. And by using those two sources, we feel we have a reasonable understanding of how a site is doing with regards to speed. But obviously, the kind of exact metrics that are used and that are collected across those two things, that's something that still varies a little bit, because it's really hard to find really strong metrics that are representative of a website overall. So I think, I don't know, Martin mentioned this in one of the videos recently, is like for some sites, it's really important to have a very low kind of time to interactive. And for other sites, it's more important that there's a very low kind of time to first byte when that first piece of information is actually shown. And so that's something where it's hard to say this is the one metric that should be used, or this is the kind of mix of metrics that needs to be used. I think that's something that needs to evolve a little bit over time.
With regards to evolving, and this kind of also goes into sort of the next question as well a little bit, because I know that moving into sort of 2019, the big Search Console revamp and the new dashboards of new tools is quite a big thing what Google's doing now. And I know it was something I believe you were personally quite excited about, because it was really updating an old tool very badly. How far along the revamp is it on that timeline? And also with that evolution, are there more sort of planned features which weren't in the old report still coming over, or anything that you can tell us about?
I think there are a number of features that are still in the old report that haven't been turned off. And my general kind of crystal ball view is if we haven't turned them off already, then we think they're valuable. So probably they will move to the new Search Console at some point. The thing that we try to do with the new Search Console, though, is not just migrate features one-to-one, but rather kind of rethink what it is that people are trying to do with that. So one example for it is the crawl errors, for example, where in the past, we would show you all of the crawl errors, and you would look at that and say, oh, this is important, this is irrelevant, and you try to figure that out yourself. And with the new Search Console, we shifted more towards the index coverage report, which kind of focuses on the end result. Like you want things indexed, and if they didn't get indexed, why was that? And that's kind of the evolution that we want to do with Search Console, is to go a little bit more away from like here are 5 million pieces of data, and more towards like here's some information that can help you to kind of guide you in the right direction. It's not kind of like the one-stop place where it gives you a list of 5 things that you need to do in order to kind of rank #1, but it's a little bit closer to giving you more exact information on what you can do rather than just what we happen to run across. And I think that's something like, for example, the crawl stats report, that's something where probably we want to go in a similar direction, where instead of just saying, like, this is how long it took to crawl, this is how many pages we crawled, maybe we could transform that into something more along the lines of like a crawl budget report or something like that, where people are essentially looking at the crawl stats report anyway with the mindset of, like, is there something I need to do here? And if so, do I need to improve my server? Do I need to kind of fix the status codes? And that's something where maybe we should just kind of take this guessing and implement it ourselves and give you more direct information on, well, here's how your site is standing with regards to crawling. Maybe it's not all of the individual milliseconds and URLs listed, but more like, well, this part of your site is OK, and this part of your site is something that you need to work on.
OK, that sounds good. That crawl report sounds good as well. I'm thinking the uses in my head. I'd like that soon, please. One thing, I mean, staying on the Search Console sort of path, and one thing which was asked a lot on a couple of Slack groups, I mean, and then there's someone else in the chat asking about this a lot, and we've discussed it as a panel, and that is around voice search, because it was hyped for so many years and then fell like a lead balloon a little bit. Are there any plans for the differentiation as potentially a device model within Search Console for voice queries and the URLs which are pulling through voice queries to be in there? Because A, for data points attribution, but also because there is the speakable schema. And in my head, if there's a schema, then the schema could be validated in some way. And if it validates correctly, it'll produce data off the back of it. So are there any plans to include that within Search Console at all? Or?
I don't know of anything kind of like short term. I think it's kind of tricky because a lot of the voice usage in these assistant devices is not the same as the way that you would query in a browser, where you see like a number of results and you can like see the impressions and then track the clicks. With voice, it's very different. Like sometimes we can just take a snippet and say that and kind of refer to that in the app so that people can look at the page, but it's hard to connect all of that. And it's also, I think for most sites, hard to have sufficient data that they actually find something useful in that information at the moment. I think voice is one of those areas that will evolve quite significantly over the next years. I don't see it as something kind of like with mobile, where it's like everyone's using it, and then suddenly everyone realizes that they've actually been using it. I think it's going to take a little bit more evolution until the engineers figure out how to make voice really useful. And with that, I imagine we'll have more data and more things that we can share in Search Console. I think the kind of structured data reporting things in Search Console, I could see that happening with kind of the speakable markup. But on the other hand, if there's no effect that we can report on in Search Console, it's kind of hard. It's like saying, like, you have all of this structured data on your site, but we can't tell you what it's doing. And you're doing the structured data right, or you're doing it wrong. And if you're doing it wrong, it's like, what are you missing out on? You don't really know. So that makes it a bit tricky.
That's just opening the floodgates to a plethora of other questions, yeah. So a couple of other questions I wanted to go over with your time. One slightly probably having over. So I believe you've been with Google now, so what, 12, 13-ish years?
I think it's like 12. I don't know. Yeah.
No. In your opinion, aside from obviously the pushes Google have made, like with mobile and things like, what have been the bigger sort of user changes you've seen, and how people are interacting with the web over that time?
It's hard to say. I thought about this a bit to kind of understand like or try to work out what I could pull out. I think mobile is kind of the obvious one, where everyone was waiting for the year of the mobile, and then it passed, and then it's like, oops. But I think one of the other changes that I see happening is just with the new generation of users that are using search engines, they just search very differently. So I see that every time I kind of interact with kind of younger kids around search to show things in search, they just search very differently. in that they'll go to Google and they'll just ask a full question. And it's not like we would do, where we say like keyword 1, keyword 2, and then like if it doesn't work, we'll add another keyword to it. They essentially ask full sentences. And I think that that's an interesting evolution, because it's something that a lot of I think the SEO community tends to skip over, because they so focus on like, I want to rank for this keyword or for this combination of keywords. And they don't realize that people actually search quite differently. And this is like the younger generation, and they're going to get older and become more kind of stronger users of search as well. So that kind of general shift of away from keyword towards more sentences, I think that's really fascinating. And I wanted to say something else, but forgot. Yeah, I think that's something where it just makes it a little bit more interesting with regards to tracking performance and watching out how things perform.
And that's a really insightful and great answer. Was it right or wrong? But yeah, it's really, I learned a lot just from that going on. So one of the final things I wanted to ask you, and this is probably the thing I was asked most at the moment, you and everything going on across both Twitter, Slack, Reddit, etc. And that's just really around Google updates and the current situation. And effectively, the shorthand of the same question is have Google consciously, because I know obviously there's the daily updates, there's the ongoing core updates, etc. Is there a hesitancy within Google that given everything going on, that there's going to be there's a hesitancy to push a button which will potentially do a daily core update, which will be more noticeable and then be flagged as potentially core update given what's going on? Is that something that is happening internally, or?
I don't think so. So at least I don't see that happening, because essentially these core updates are used to improve the quality of the search results. And if we can improve the quality of the search results, we shouldn't hold back on that, especially when people depend more on search. I think there are few effects or side effects, or I don't know, things that are happening additionally, though. On the one hand, there are lots of people that are working in search are working on kind of coronavirus-related things as well, to make sure that the critical search results are working really well. So maybe they're a little bit busy. On the other hand, all of the testers that we have for search changes, what are they called? The quality raters. Quality raters, they're probably more busy as well, or also kind of like tied in with other things and trying to find toilet paper and food and make sure that everything that they need for life otherwise is kind of taken care of. So they're a little bit more busy. And I think overall, that just means that people are busy with other things at the moment. It's not that they've consciously decided to not make any changes. So I could definitely see changes continuing to happen. And if we can find a way to improve the search results and we can confirm that it's actually working well, we will try to do that. It's not that we will hold back and say, well, SEOs will get confused and they'll be upset if we make this change. But on the other hand, users are really waiting to get better results. So it's like we should focus on the users first.
That makes a lot of sense. One final question just before we go, and this just came from the chat, John. And this kind of probably goes back to the question for last with how generational change in how users are searching. And the question just around that is when you said the younger generation, the sort of what rough sort of age bracket or millennial generation XYZ we put towards that? I
have no idea. So I just see it anecdotally. It's not that I have any kind of magic reports on that. So I've sometimes gone to schools to talk about search and how kind of the web works and how these systems work. And that's essentially where I see that happening. But I'm sure there's a fluid transition all the way up, where it's like the people who are just used to search being available all the time, they're probably not aware that it used to be a lot clunkier, that if you didn't search with keyword, that you would not get any useful results. And those who are kind of more used to using voice search, or kind of just more used to kind of the modern search engines that are able to understand sentences, they just like, it works, so why should you go back to something more kind of, I don't know, old school or more simple than you actually need?
No, that makes sense. So first, I want to say thank you for your time. I appreciate this was extremely last minute. You're a gentleman for agreeing to come on with about 4 days' notice. And yeah, thank you very much.
Well, thanks for having me. It's great to join in. And I think these kind of virtual events are a lot of fun, a lot easier than flying out. And I mean, nowadays, nobody flies anyway. But it's cool to be here. Thanks.
Thank you, John. We appreciate you.
Thanks.
Thank you. So one final thing I want to say is thank you to Dan, Jamie, Reza, and John for giving up time this Friday afternoons, for being part of the first VirtuaCon. Hopefully people like this and we can do them a little bit more. And as Dan's requested, we'll stagger the time zone to accommodate the West Coast a little bit better. But yeah, thank you everybody, and thank you for 40+ people who have been watching throughout at home. And yeah, thank you. A recording of this will be going up later on as well. So yeah, thank you and have a good evening, everyone.
Thanks.
Thank you, Dan.